Welcome back to another episode of Stories Sustain Us, the podcast where we dive into the inspiring journeys of those making a difference in the world of sustainability. I'm your host, Stephen Schauer, and today we have an exciting episode for you. My guest today is Louis Chan, a sustainability manager whose story begins in the vibrant city of Singapore. Growing up surrounded by the natural beauty of Southeast Asia, Louis developed a deep connection to nature that has fueled his lifelong passion for sustainability. In this episode, Louis takes us through his fascinating journey from his childhood in Singapore to his current role at an investment holding company. He's on the front lines of reducing mining emissions and carbon intensity, proving that business and sustainability can go hand in hand. Louis shares valuable insights on the importance of tracking and measuring impact to drive improvement in sustainability efforts. He emphasizes the need for balance in ESG reporting and highlights the triple bottom line: people, planet, and profit. We'll also dive into some pressing issues like the divisive pushback against sustainability metrics in the United States compared to Southeast Asia. Louis also provides useful tips for consumers to combat greenwashing by identifying red flags in marketing, researching company history, and giving feedback. Let me tell you a bit more about Louis Chan before diving into the interview. In his role as the sustainability manager for an investment holding company, Louis assumes leadership in the formulation of sustainability strategies and policies, and he conducts ESG due diligence and sustainability reporting efforts with the subsidiaries. In addition, as a trustee for a UK charity, Louis has played a key role in the establishment and enforcement of robust sustainability policies. His visionary approach ensures the charity's unwavering commitment to achieving carbon neutrality by 2030, thereby making a tangible impact on global environmental goals. Louis has also co-founded and advises various startups, such as a company called Arctic Glide, which has patented coil technology to reduce electricity consumption in air conditioning, which we talk about in this interview. His advisory work lies primarily in the climate tech space, and he specializes in helping businesses scale and doing investor relations work. Louis personally enjoys navigating the intricacies of capital markets to drive positive change in sustainable investments. And in all his free time, if that's not enough, Louis is a Muay Thai boxer, which is also fascinating to me. In the interview ahead, Louis paints a hopeful vision for the future where business incentives and sustainability are perfectly aligned. So get ready for an enlightening conversation with Louis Chan on Stories Sustain Us, where we are inspiring action through the power of storytelling. All right. Well, hello, Louis. How are you? I guess it's this evening for you. It's good early morning for me in Seattle. It's evening for you, correct? Where are you in the world?
Hi, Stephen. Yes, thank you for having me. So, yes, I'm currently based in Singapore. So, it's in the evening for me, but I'm still very much awake because I
Yeah.
sometimes sleep quite late as well.
Well, thank you for staying up late and joining me. I appreciate working with you kind of beforehand to schedule this to find time that would work for both of us. I'm really excited to have you on the show. So I guess, Louis, let's just jump in and tell me a little bit about yourself. I haven't had the pleasure of meeting you yet, so I'm looking forward to getting to know you. Tell me, where were you born? What was, your childhood like, and how did you get to this point in your career? What's your history? What's your story?
Thank you. Yeah, so I was born in Singapore. So, I'm a Singapore citizen and I have generally stayed in Singapore since then. So, I think, how was I think Singapore, I'm not sure if you have ever visited here, but if you have not, or if you have, you can always let me know if you ever come back here. But Singapore is a mix of urban and some form of nature. So I think it was quite lucky for me that actually I was born while I live in a building and everything. I had a constant exposure to the environment because my parents would always bring me out to nature parks or to
Yeah.
the rivers nearby to just experience what is it like to be out of your house. So that actually taught me a lot about the value of what nature can do for us and why we should actually protect it. And so that's how I got into sustainability, which is my current area of work. And I've been doing this for quite some time. And I think that I can introduce a bit about what I do in my company. So basically, I work for an investment holding company, whereby we look into investments into commodities, into the mining space. And what I do in sustainability for them is to basically a few things. One of which is to look for technologies to actually reduce our mining emissions or carbon intensity, because we all know that, okay, at least I know, and most people do know, that mining is very much needed for the energy transition in terms of the
Sure.
minerals and the materials that are needed. So it's a bit hard to just completely stop mining, but it's more important to know that since the materials are needed, what can we do to reduce the negative impact? And that is through different ways. For example, through carbon capture, through hydrogen, to solar, and so much more. So other things that I do is to do reporting, because I think that it's always important to actually measure and track what you're actually doing or the impact you're actually making onto the planet. If you don't track it, you'll never know how can you improve it. So tracking is the first step, but it should never be the last step. It should be the first step to then work out a plan to actually improve the information. That's what I do as
Sure.
a job, amongst other things. Other things that I do is also be on a board member for a few organizations, because I believe in contributing my expertise. I don't know everything, but I think I want to share what I do know and to also learn from others. So that involves, for example, being on the board of trustee for an organization in the UK called Report Out, whereby we look at LGBTQIA plus communities. And what I look at specifically is the sustainability angle on how those individuals are actually more affected or more prone to certain climate disasters. Other things that I do is also I co-founded a startup is called Arctic Glide, whereby we are in the air conditioning space, whereby we aim to reduce the electricity consumption. Because we believe that since buildings contribute or air conditioning contributes significantly to a building's emissions, that should be a
Sure.
key area of focus as well. So other than that, I volunteer a lot in the grassroots, and in hobbies I do Muay Thai, which is a form of Thai boxing, I guess, and I go
Oh
to a
yeah,
gym.
yeah.
Thank you.
So let me back you. Well, I want to dive into a lot of your professional experience in just a minute, but can we go back in time? So for folks who may not be familiar with Singapore, and I haven't been to that area of the world yet. I've been, to India, a little to the northwest of you, and to China northeast of you, and Australia kind of southeast of you, but I haven't been into that area of Singapore, which for folks who may not be fully aware is kind of in the Malaysia area. Is that correct? And it's an independent nation, 5 or 6 million residents, I believe, if I understand that correctly.
Yes, that's correct. 5 to 6 million, and
Yeah,
we are very close to Malaysia. So oftentimes, not me, but oftentimes a lot of my friends actually just drive over to Malaysia to enjoy the food and the things that they have to offer as well. And also a lot of Malaysians actually come over to Singapore to work and vice versa.
nice. So your childhood growing up, then you said you grew up in a high rise building. Did you have siblings? What was your childhood like? And how far away were some of the nature parks and things that you visited? Tell me a little bit more about growing up and how you kind of got onto this sustainability path that your parents helped, kind of bring you along on. But I'd love to know a little bit more about how you got here.
Yes, thank you. So actually, I'm the only child, so I was the only one in the family, and my family is quite small. It's just my parents and I. But of course, I always have interactions with my relatives. I grew up with my grandparents actually, and also my aunties and uncles. So while I'm the only child, I think I've always received a lot of love and care. So I
Yeah,
don't feel neglected or anything, which I guess is a good thing looking back. But of course, I'm not sure if I felt lonely when I was a child, but looking back, I may have felt lonely, I guess, because you're the only one, and I didn't have any pets except fishes, if I remember correctly. But I
yeah,
think that is fine. I think I had accepted it at then, and I think I grew up fine after that. But I think what allowed me to have the social gathering or social interaction is because, I mean, in Singapore there's a lot of nurseries and play groups, so I think I grew up quite closely with my childhood friends. I think there was a lot of interaction. My parents were more allowed me to grow more and gave me more freedom, so I didn't have to go back that early on certain days when I was in primary school or secondary school. So I could just hang out with them and learn from them, teach them stuff, and then basically enjoy what the world has to offer besides just the textbooks and all sorts
yeah.
of things. And that taught me that how I love human interaction. So I know that I mentioned in my professional career is sustainability, but actually my degree in university was actually in pharmacy, and I chose
Okay.
pharmacy because I love bio and chemistry, and I still do. And I also wanted to meet people because my impression then and it still stands is that in the pharmacy wards and everything, you get to work a lot with the patients, and usually they are elderly, some middle age and whatever. But I think that I love interacting with them, which is why I chose to pursue a degree in pharmacy at that point in time. But I think along the way, I realized that I think sustainability was more for me, and may also be because my childhood, how I was brought up, is that it's not just the urban sort of things, even though I'm in Singapore, but also the nature sort of things. I guess maybe that influenced me in a way. I'm not sure if it ever did, but looking back, I think it did. So
Yeah.
that's why I pivoted away. Yes.
In sports or any extracurricular activities or anything as you were growing up that you were involved in besides your studies, what kept you interested as you were growing up?
I mean, in primary school, I played table tennis. So that's the main sport that I did. In secondary school, not so much, but in JC and in university, I did a lot of I did dragon boat for a while.
Oh,
I think that
yeah,
is
wow, yeah,
quite fun, actually looking back,
yeah,
yes. And then I went to then that got me interested in gymming, because I think that in dragon boat you have to be fit, and then gym was the one that
sure,
complements that. So that's why I went to the gym, and then somehow I got interested into my Thai boxing, Muay Thai, because I think it's
yeah,
also important to learn self-defense, and I think it's fun. To me, it's fun. It's tiring, but I think that you only have to go through hardship to actually become a better person. So Muay Thai was what has kept me doing for the past 3-4 years.
yeah.
So
Are
that
you
kept me alert.
competitive in Muay Thai competitions, or is it more just for the training and the self-defense and kind of staying physically fit, or do you actually compete in Muay Thai matches?
I mean, I've only done sparring, so I've not been to any competitive match, but that is actually one of my goals to achieve this year, because I think it's just different. I think it's going to be quite tough my first match, but I think that I have to just tell
Sure.
myself that I can do it, and even if I lose or win, I think that's fine, correct? It's just going through it. And anyway, I'm not doing it representing a country or anything, so the pressure should not be that high, I hope. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm super impressed with that, and anybody who is in those types of physical combat type sports, because yeah, it's as much mental as it is physical. I'm sure to be able to compete in something like that, it's super impressive. I didn't know that about you, so thank you for sharing that, and good luck. Hope you make
Thank
your
you.
goal and get into a competitive match this year. That's amazing.
Yes, thank
So
you. And I
when
think that
you were
anyone,
in, go ahead.
I was going to say that anyone, regardless of your age, can actually do Muay Thai. So there are people in the gym who's like 60 and they're still doing great. So I think that whoever is listening, even if you are 60, 50, I think you can just try, because if you never try, you never know, and maybe it's the right thing for you. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, very impressive. I'll have to stay in touch with you. I want to see how you do, because
Yes.
that's something that I would love to see you in a competition and support you in that way. Um, so as you mentioned, you were doing pharmacy in university, and you eventually made a switch to the sustainability career that you're in. Tell me a little bit about that transition. How did you go? Were you a practicing pharmacist first and then made the transition, or did you make that transition before you even got fully engaged into the pharmaceutical field?
Yes, I actually made the transition before I got fully engaged into the pharmaceutical field. So I graduated with a bachelor's in pharmacy, but I did not, my first job was already in sustainability as a consultant. So that's my career. As for how did I do it, I think it's through internships, because in university and even in life in general, I like trying out different things. I think that it's important to take risks and learn and see what the world has to offer, because you only live like for that amount of time. So it was through
Sure.
one of the internships that actually exposed me to sustainability more than what I had thought. Because in the past, I used to think that sustainability was, as I shared earlier, about the nature, about biodiversity, which is great, but I didn't really see or know about what companies can and should do about this particular incident or this particular phenomenon. So it was through internships that I learned more about sustainability, and I felt that I learned quite fast, became a fast learner, and so I was able to grasp concepts quite quickly. And then I did more things after that. I did different programs with like WWF, with UN, the United Nations Environmental Program as well, and a few others. And that firmed up why I love sustainability and why I felt a meaning or purpose being in this field as compared to pharmacy. Not saying that pharmacy is not a good place to be in. I think
Sure.
it's very much needed in this society, especially in Singapore where there's an aging population. But I think that my calling was more on sustainability, and I'm sure someone else is definitely much better fitted for pharmacy anyway. So yeah.
Yeah. Was your first internship in the mining industry, or what industry was that first internship with that kind of sparked your interest in sustainability and learning more about it?
My first internship in sustainability was in Deloitte. So it's a consulting
Oh,
advisory
Deloitte. Sure,
firm.
sure. Big consulting
So
firm.
yes.
Yeah. So that's
And
kind of
I
what
think
it started. Go ahead.
yes, it gave me the exposure, and I guess, and I got to meet a lot of people who were also passionate about this particular field. So taught me that I think it's fine to you should not. For me, my personal belief is that you should not be like dragged down or put down by what major you chose, because I think that if you really believe in wherever you want to go, you should just go for it. I mean, you don't want to regret for the next 40 years working in a place you don't belong. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great advice, and we had Dash on several episodes again, and he had similar advice with his career path, and as you just mentioned, going forward, just trying, even though you might be educated this direction, but if your passions are pulling you somewhere else, to follow your passions. So is it in Deloitte that you started to kind of be exposed to the environment, social governance, the ESG type of tracking? Is that correct?
Yes, it taught me about
Yeah.
it. It taught me about where can I look for the different sustainability reporting standards and how to apply to help companies actually report. Because in Singapore, listed companies have to do this mandatory sustainability reporting at that point in time, and even till today. So yeah.
Yeah. And for folks who may not be familiar, I'm going to tell you what I think ESG
Mhm.
is and other sustainability, and then I'd love for you to educate me in others. But so the environment, social governance, the ESG type of reporting, as I understand it, is really looking at other metrics beyond just the shareholder value, the financial benefits of a company, and you might be looking at energy efficiency or greenhouse gas emissions or biodiversity targets, water usage, those types of things in the environmental area. On the social side, you might be looking at employee compensation, health benefits, training, diversity, equity, inclusion type of things. And then on the governance side, you might be looking at board independence and board attendance, litigation risks, transparency, things like that. So is my understanding correct? And how does this work? I guess just to explain it to folks that might not be familiar with these types of reporting procedures.
Yes, I think your understanding is definitely correct. I think I like it that when you mentioned about the environmental, you also brought up biodiversity. I think oftentimes when we hear environment, we just hear about carbon emissions, because that's much easier to track. And as for biodiversity, it's so hard to track. There's no clear matrix.
Yeah,
How can we do? I think yes. I think maybe I can add on that actually
please.
these things, there's actually two ways to look at what these are what we call material topics. So companies in certain industries have certain material topics that are more important to them, or things that they should care more about. Because if it's a topic that you do not have any influence over, then there's no point to actually track it. And we all understand that companies have different or limited resources. So there's actually two forms of materiality. One of which is impact materiality, which I think is what you're also mentioning, which is basically the
Okay.
impact that a company does onto the environment or onto the planet or onto society. So this is external, and the key reporting framework for this is the GRI framework, Global Reporting Initiative. But I think another sort of materiality dimension is what we call financial materiality. So it's
Okay.
basically how do those factors actually affect the company and therefore shareholders' value. Because I know we all say in sustainability that shareholders should not be the key focus and it should be stakeholders. But when you actually implement practically, it has to also influence shareholders. There has to be buy-in by the shareholders. So
Sure.
shareholders should be made exposed on what factors, how can these actually affect them. For example, I think you mentioned something about litigation risk. So maybe if a company actually has huge environmental impact which affects the company's reputation, or actually affects it because more countries are actually pricing in carbon these days. So if you're pricing carbon to your financial statements, it will affect the valuation, even the shareholders' value, and therefore shareholders are forced to actually consider these topics. So that is more of a financial materiality. So there are these two forms of materiality. The gold standard, in my opinion, is what we call double materiality, which is to consider both and how they influence and affect one another. Only then
Nice.
we can have a good framework to help companies. But sad to say, I think most regions do not actually require double materiality, but I believe that eventually it will be a requirement in most legislation.
I appreciate clarifying that and explaining it in a way that a novice like me and probably other members of the audience can understand. So that this is, I was really excited to bring you on because of your expertise, and this is such an important aspect of sustainability. Obviously we talk a lot, like you mentioned, about climate change and carbon issues and getting to net zero, and some of those things I think are beginning to be understood by the public a little bit more. But this financial side of it, sometimes is a mystery to novices because it sounds so complicated, and we need good folks like you doing that work to help. And I also appreciate you mentioning that it's really a balance, as I interpreted what you said. This the triple bottom line of planet and people and profit has to be balanced, because there does need to be a profit for the shareholders in this. Otherwise they're going to lose interest or try to go to a different direction in order to keep that profit margin. So I think what I understood you to say is that's kind of the sweet spot, is how do you balance all of these things so that businesses are making good decisions that are healthy for the planet and healthy for society, but also make money, because that's not a bad thing to make money. So is that kind of that balance is what you're trying to help companies find? Is that what your goal is?
Yes, because I think that eventually, if we work in a company, where you have to always get stakeholder and management buy-ins, and so cost savings is obviously the key priority for all these companies as well. Unless, in my opinion, I think those companies who are willing to sacrifice a bit of profit or revenue are those bigger MNCs, but they have enough bandwidth to actually sacrifice one area over the other. Yeah, I think I
Sure.
also want to mention, you mentioned something about balance. I think that beyond just planet, people, and profit, I think what is important is even in the ESG realm itself, in the term using ES and G, there has to also be a balance. Because oftentimes, whenever I read articles or see companies' reports, they may talk about the improvement in the environmental side of things, but they did not mention about the drawbacks that it did to the social element side of things as well. I mean, being in the mining space, we can clearly just reduce the emissions by shutting down the mines or whatever, but the social equity, when it comes to the miner's life, miner's livelihood, whereby the whole family actually depends on the mines, will actually be greatly affected. So I hope
Sure.
that more companies will actually report more transparently on how ES and G as a whole is being affected by their actions, and not just glamorize the improvement in one certain aspect. So yeah.
So you let me transition into mining a little bit, because it is such an important industry. We do need
Yep.
it, and certainly for if we're going to be moving our world away from fossil fuels in a sense and moving towards more battery and electricity, batteries are heavily dependent upon the
Yes.
materials of the world that we need to mine to get to those materials in order to create the batteries we need to get away from oil and gas
Yep.
and other carbon emitting. So how did you get into that field? How did you move from Deloitte and transition your career to eventually get into the mining industry? That sounds like an interesting story to me.
Thank you. I think for me, I was in Deloitte. I had exposure to different sectors as well, and different functions, and how to help different companies or clients. It ranged over healthcare, even data centers, telecommunications, etc. So I was quite open to any sector, but I did not work on any mining projects. Also because I'm in Singapore. Singapore, I don't think there's any mines here, because most of them are in Canada, US, or even in Australia, which is where the mines are actually based.
Hmm.
So how did I transition? I think it was someone who just reached out and say that there's mining, there's this unique opportunity whereby it's an investment firm and they are doing in the mining space. It's a pretty unique space for someone who is in Singapore. So do you want to check it out? I think that I checked it out and thought it was quite interesting. I wanted to be in a what we call a hard to abate sector to actually so that we can have most impact. Because for my personal opinion is that it is not I do not want to be in a space where it's already so green in that sense because I will not have much material impact to them. I may improve by 1
Sure, sure.
2%, but that is not significant as compared to in mining. Even if it's 1 2% improvements in their emission intensity, I think that's quite a big deal from a environmental point
Yeah,
of view. So I say yes to
that
on the
makes sense.
challenge, and that's how I translated here. But luckily, a lot of skills that I learned in Deloitte and also in other places, and a lot of courses that I took, definitely helped in me being extremely well equipped for this role. I mean, the only thing that I, of course, had to only learn on the job was the mining technicals. But the sustainability side, I was more or less there. That being said, I always read up the first thing in the morning about the latest sustainability happening. So that is quite a good habit that I think I recommend. So yeah, that's how I got into mining and investments.
Yeah. What what are some of your morning reading resources? So if folks listening to this or watching to this, would like to follow your good habits of staying up to speed on all the latest information, where do you get your sustainability information from?
I think a few places. I think one of them which I find quite useful is a Slack channel called Work on Climate. So basically, it's a community whereby different people chat about sustainability happenings, and some of them are job seekers, some of them are investors, some of them are entrepreneurs. I think you get to see the whole sphere, and most of them are not in Asia. So I think that gives me a different perspective as well on what is there out of Asia. I also read different news articles on like Wall Street Journal. I think that is a good source for me. There's a green or sustainability section in Wall Street Journal, so that's why I read out specifically. I do also read others and based on Singapore, but what I do is basically to just search, for example, sustainable finance news, and then I will go to Google and then I'll toggle it to be past 24 hours so that I get to read what has happened in the past 24 hours. And because my mines are in Australia, so then I think it's important to keep aware about the energy transition or energy mix in Australia, and that
Hmm.
not only involves about what kind of energy is being used in Australia, but also the geopolitics that is happening. Because I think in most part of the world, including Australia, it's the election season this year or next year. So how do the opposition, for example, actually propose certain forms of energy, and whether is it feasible? Because if it's feasible, and if it's completely different from what the country has traditionally planned, how would that influence the mining operation? So, for example, I think as of this recording, the opposition mentioned something about having nuclear, but Australia traditionally was against nuclear, or at least it's not in the law that nuclear is not recommended. So,
Hmm.
how would this actually affect, and would this opposition win? Those sort of things that I would consider in the morning. I think it keeps me alert, it keeps me aware. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. I've got a few weekly newsletters that I subscribe to, so I do my reading on a kind of on the weekends on a weekly basis, summing up everything that I've seen as opposed to a daily basis. But I think it's really important, however it works for you as an individual, to stay informed and stay educated. There's so much information happening, some of it really fascinating and interesting and positive, and some of it, as I'm sure audience is aware, is not great, and it's important to stay up to speed on all of that. You mentioned geopolitical issues, given your work is multinational with how you run your investments in different countries. I'm curious, here in the United States, as we're in election season in the last year or so, there's been a really big blowback by
Mhm.
the conservatives, folks more on the right side of the political spectrum, against these types of sustainability measurements and metrics in business, ESG measurements and diversity, equity, inclusion measurements. These types of things there's been a very active um, push by the many Republicans here in the United States to do away with those or minimize those, or generally, you know, uh, push back on those types of measurements. How are you seeing that play out in the rest of the world? Is there a similar pushback on these types of sustainability metrics, and how is that impacting your work in seeing, at least here in the States, such a blowback? But if it's happening in other places, I know in Europe as well, there's kind of a hardline push from the right to minimize some of these advances that have been made. So what's your experience saying about global politics and the either advancing of these types of measurements or the pushback against them?
Thank you for the question. I think in Singapore at least, or in Asia, in ASEAN, the ASEAN or Southeast Asia region, sustainability was a pretty recent phenomenon as compared to, let's say, in Europe or even in the USA. So I think that we have not reached a stage whereby there's huge debate between both sides on whether they are for or against climate change or climate action. So I think it's definitely not as divisive as compared to the US. Even in Australia, I think that generally for my sentiment, I do not travel down there often, but based on my sentiments is that they are generally supportive of the climate acts and climate regulations that is being made in Australia. Also because the government has different initiatives or regulations, for example, renewable energy targets, or in what they call safeguard mechanism, whereby they limit or they require certain polluters to actually reduce their carbon intensity by 4.97 on a yearly basis. So I think that yeah. So let me try and think some more.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Um, go ahead.
yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, shit. I was going to say that like in the US, I think that maybe one reason why there was such huge division. I'm not from the US and have not been much exposed to the US, but I think it's because of the link between sustainability or climate change and the woke culture. Maybe it's how it was being portrayed in the initials, whereby people had the impression that it's going to cost them a lot, or the way certain policies are being done. Because I think you mentioned about DE&I, and I'm a huge proponent on how board and how companies should have diverse employees of different backgrounds and everything. But maybe it's the way whereby they say that there's a huge focus on, let's say, gender representation, whereby companies must have a certain board percentage whereby it's female. Maybe it's not what it is, but how they actually presented it. Because I guess by saying in a certain way, there's some pushback by certain groups of individuals. But how even in DE and I think it's more important to actually consider beyond just the gender, but also maybe the background, the social economic background, or the
Yeah.
educational background. But I also understand why gender is the first thing that is being considered, because it's quite easy to implement, and I think there are some positive benefits of doing so. But maybe it's the framing that can be improved. And I also think maybe in certain parts of the world, it's because it becomes a political issue. So a certain party may actually raise it to gain more credibility or gain more votes. So that's why the
Yeah.
gap is just increasing. But while it's unfortunate, I think hope is not lost. I think US is doing, at least with the current party, is doing quite well with a lot of, with the Inflation Reduction Act especially, giving grants, giving tax credits that enables more startups or more firms to actually do things which may not be commercially profitable initially, because there has to be a gap that has to be filled by
Right.
governmental grants and all. So I'm good to see what is happening, but I think more can be done. But it's good for now.
Yeah. I appreciate your insight, and I agree. I think some of the political challenges that we have here in the States is about, in some part, about framing. Sustainability is often framed as an either or. Either you save the planet and do socially good, and then you go broke doing it, or you make all the money you can make and you don't worry about those other issues. It's our political system is often this either or choice, and going back to your earlier comments about, no, you can do sustainable things and make a profit at the same time.
Yeah.
I think our politics here in this country are really don't allow that type of messaging, because somebody has to, politically you have to have kind of somebody to fight against, so they formulate these arguments that aren't necessarily based in reality, that we can do both. We can protect the planet, advance social equity, and make profit for shareholders. So I appreciate your insight around that. Let me I want to give you a chance. Also, you had mentioned transition away from some of the geopolitics and getting back into your career path. I want to make sure we bring up the Arctic Glide company. You'd mentioned that that's a air conditioning space that you're working in. Tell us a little bit about what that company does and what you're hoping to accomplish. I want to make sure to give you time to promote that activity as well that you're doing.
Thank you. So this Arctic Glide basically came out, or the co-founders actually came out with a patented coil technology, which is being used in air conditioning. So in Singapore, it's a tropical, it's like summer every day in the year. It's extremely humid, and that's why a lot of people actually use air conditioning. And I think it's while air conditioning contributes significantly to carbon emissions and electricity consumption, it's not possible to tell everyone to just stop using it. So then the
Sure.
solution for that we realized was actually, what if there was a way to actually reduce the electricity consumption needed by air conditioning. And so what the co-founder, the CTO, actually came up with this coil technology, whereby if we change the design of the aircon, change certain fitting and piping, and put this coil inside, basically we use what we call convectional current system, and what is also known as passive displacement cooling, to actually reduces or remove the need for a fan. So usually in air conditioning, there's always a fan inside whereby it blows the cold air out.
Sure.
But with our
Yeah.
coil technology, there is a way to actually push the cool air down through a duct or through a pipe, and then it will actually rise up naturally as it touches the human body. Why? Because human is obviously hotter than the cold air. So as the air touches
Sure.
us, it becomes hotter and therefore it rises. So that is a layman way of explaining it. But
Yeah.
basically, we realized and calculated that there is a cost electricity saving of 30% if we use this technology. Of course, I mean, it is, if you ask me, is it going to be cheaper or much cheaper than traditional air conditioning? I think it's not going to be. But long term, over a 15-year life cycle cost calculation, is actually there's actually a lot of savings with a payback period of about 4 years only. So long term, it will save immediately. It won't obviously, but we believe that most aircons can last for 15 years, so it makes financial sense as well. Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
A fantastic idea technology wise. I mean, I think you know some of what's going to kind of help us get out of the climate mess that we're in is obviously advancing technologies and things that we can do smarter and more efficient and more effectively. And what a great idea! Obviously, cool air drops and warm air rises. So what a great concept there to get that type of technology into such an important thing that we need, right? We need air conditioning, and particularly in major urban areas that are getting hotter and hotter as our temperatures around the globe are rising. You also touched on something, I think, there in that story that I want to dig a little deeper on, because I think this is important in many different aspects of sustainable technology, is looking at the life of the product, because the cost savings at the beginning might not be apparent. But if you look at the life cycle of a particular product, and that, I think, is a concept that's really important, but people don't always grasp that because we're looking for that immediate savings or that immediate benefit. So how do you market the product, or how do you educate the public to get people to start thinking longer scale about things like your air conditioning technology or solar technology or other things that you might not see the immediate cost benefit from, but over the life cycle of that product you'll get more benefit than the current technology. So what's your insights around how to get people to think differently, think long term instead of short term?
Thank you. It's a thing, I don't have the perfect answer for that, but what I do whenever I get into conversations is to, especially with real estate developers or maybe through mechanical engineering consultants, is to actually ask them, what are their pain points? And often their pain points is about energy saving or electricity savings. And luckily in Singapore, there's also a increasing push for sustainability, whereby buildings have to get a certain rating, green mark, so that if not, I think they can't be built. So therefore, there's all this push that makes conversations with real estate developers much easier. And I think that it also happens to be that in this space of real estate and construction, most of the consumers or customers actually think long term because they will have a building for a long time. No one actually builds a building to be demolished in 10 years. They build it maybe for over 100 years, for example. So that makes the conversation actually easier with them as well. I mean,
Sure.
I've also realized that maybe initially when I was in uni, that I think that conversations, it may be a bit too idealistic to think of just pushing or to persuade people through the act of climate change by just telling them that, you need to save the planet, if not there's going to be sea level rise or whatever, because they may not actually feel it. And especially in Singapore, whereby we are quite sheltered, so we do not have hurricanes or typhoons, so we don't actually see the impact. So it's harder to convince them, even from an emotional point of view. But it's
Sure.
Singaporeans generally are still more practical, so the financial element has to come in as well. Of course, we do look at also different business model, and we do experiment with different schemes. For instance, some things we should research that that is a suggestion to people who are listening, is they can what we use as what we call as a software as a service or cooling as a service, whereby people do not actually have to pay upfront for a particular equipment, but they can pay for whatever savings they actually get. They can then pay a premium or revenue to this particular technology. So by doing that, I think it reduces the so-called pain from a buyer's
Mm-hmm.
perspective, but they will only have to pay when they save. So it also makes sense. But of course, this does not mean it's ideal because there's a lot of things to consider whether the company is able to have the initial capital to actually get all these
Absorb that,
equipment,
right?
sell it and everything. But these are just some ways.
Yeah, I like that, and I think I heard in your answer a few things that are important. One, it sounds like there's some need, and you mentioned here in the States as well with some of the recent legislations that's been passed. But there's on one tool is government regulation. It sounds like in Singapore there is certain standards that have been established for new buildings and industries to hit the targets established via government regulation. And then there's also then the innovative side of the marketplace. And so, how can you innovate and find the technology and then, market that through different, mechanisms and schemes such as, paying when you save. I mean, that's
Yep.
a fascinating type of tool as well. If a business can absorb that, as you said, that initial financial impact. So am I interpreting you correctly that there's kind of a need for both some governments to set some standards so that the industries know the targets to hit, but then the industry itself can become innovative and do what so great about capitalism is that it can find the new ways quicker and faster and hopefully more efficient than just government oversight can provide. So is that kind of what I'm getting from you as far as that we need a little bit of both government regulation as well as the entrepreneurial innovative spirit of business?
Yes, I think that's definitely correct. And just to add on to that, besides enforcing from a governmental point of view, I think it also be good if society or even government can actually promote innovation, because I think that based on my understanding in Asia, people are generally more conservative. But I think I'm getting an increasing sense that there's more accelerators or incubators that is being created in the ASEAN or Southeast Asia region, which is good because it shows that money and effort is being put to group together different people who have different ideas, but obviously no one has a complete full set of skills that can scale up a business. But by having accelerators programs, then I think that it brings people with complementary skill sets together to solve a problem that they both or everyone cares about, and that can create more innovation. So basically, the point I wanted to share is to create an environment whereby such innovations can be cultured, and to also maybe instill the mindset that it's okay to fail. I think it is a bit idealistic to think that, or to not want to fail. I think that to me at least, every failure is a step forward still, and there's something you can learn. Maybe time is wasted, maybe time is not wasted, but there's always things to learn to your next venture. I don't really believe that people can succeed at the first time anyways. So, yeah.
Sure. Failure is part of the process. I
Yes.
appreciate that perspective as well. I mean, we if you're not failing, you're probably not trying.
Yeah.
so,
Correct.
um, so let me ask one kind of changing subjects again a little bit on you, but tapping back into your expertise in sustainable investing and um, the idea of businesses maybe being a little exaggerating their sustainable footprint, greenwashing, in that area is becoming a more and more well-known problem that
Yeah.
businesses might do a great job marketing about how green they are, or whatever buzzword that they're using on their products, but if you dig deeper into the business practices, you might find out that they're not very sustainable at all. So what is your advice for just an average consumer? How do we know? Where can we find information, or how can someone really learn if a company that they want to buy a product from is you know is following some of these ESG metrics, or doing the best that they can do to make a profit, but also be sustainable as well. So how can we combat greenwashing, I guess, is the question.
Thank you for that question. Yes, I think that greenwashing phenomena has actually seen an increase, but I think that with more regulations nowadays, I think there is at least a decrease from what I'm sensing. For example, even in the fund space, I think that there was a EU taxonomy whereby basically the European Union actually declared on what are some metrics that is needed to consider a fund green, and they broke it down into different articles as well. So that's good. But as a consumer, when we look at from a retail perspective, how do we know, or how can we be more astute when it comes to such claims? I think the first is the easiest, which is basically look at the product, look at the advertisement. If it's obviously just green stuff, whereby they use imagery of forest, whereby the company has nothing to do with forest at all, that is a huge red flag to me, because it shows that they are trying to just deceive the general audience by pretending that, oh, everything is green. For example, there was some advertisement, I think, about banks. I won't say any names, whereby basically it was just green, and then there was no, and they put some claims about net zero by when, or they have stopped financing a certain coal company, but actually behind the scenes, some of their funds are actually still financing coal. I mean,
Yeah.
these are huge red flags to me. If I see those, I would be more, I would suspect these firms more than general firms which just use normal colors like black, red, or any other color. So that's number one. I think number two is to then check the claims, because it's important to know that certain claims can be deceived. Now, those claims does not have to be lies, because those claims could be just part of a wider set of data, but they just nitpick certain form of information. So if it's
Right.
me, and if of course I must have time, I'll look into whether those claims are actually true. Whether is it true that they have invested, let's say, 50 billion in carbon credits for a particular area, and more importantly, where have those funding actually been to? I think it's to check the information. I mean, nowadays with Google and Yahoo and everything, the so much information out there. You can just search it up, search the company's sustainability reports as well, and you can actually read and find out what's actually there. That's number two. I think number three, what I will also do is to then look at the history of a particular company. If a company has traditionally done some form of greenwashing, I think you can be more skeptical about that. That's not being said that a company can never change. I think companies should and have
Sure.
actually changed. But I guess that is some form of things you have to consider as well. The last thing I wanted to share is that I think it's to just give a chance to companies, because some companies, maybe their marketing professionals or communications professionals might not be trained in sustainability, or they just have a marketing lens to everything. And that's why there's some deceive being shown. But I think it's not to just criticize, but to also maybe inform them. Maybe a lot of companies have their contact us page on their website anyway. You can just let them know, that is this truly what you claim, and is there any implications? Do you want to reconsider this? And I think with that mindset, it makes companies less fearful of sharing their green initiatives, because besides greenwashing, there's also, I think all of us know about green hushing, whereby companies just hide behind and not claim anything because they fear that if they claim something, some green activists will just come after them. So I don't want that to happen as
Yeah.
well. So it's hard to strike a balance, but I think as long as we go in to a conversation with that balance in mind, then I think that is a good step forward.
Yeah. And thank you for bringing up the green hushing as well, that idea that companies are afraid to share what they're doing because of the fear of backlash, or what may happen. So thank you for bringing up that perspective. From your, obviously being more on the business side, that's something that a consumer might not be aware of. So thank you for sharing that. So Lewis, I want to give you an opportunity here as we're getting kind of near the end of the interview. Thank you again so much for your time and your expertise and explaining everything that you've shared with us today. It's been really helpful to me. I hope for the audience as well. But now's your time to kind of plug whatever your own businesses, or how can people get in touch with you? What's your call to action? What would you want people who are listening to this or watching this, what do you want them to do? What's your call to action for the world watching this?
Thank you. I think call to action to me is, which is something I've also been doing, is basically to, all of us meeting that being sustainable or making a positive impact is actually very difficult and that it does not affect us. But I think we can see, or we should be exposed to what climate change can actually do. And I think that let's look at past data. There's a lot of data which I can obviously share offline as well, that can actually shows that what the link between human actions or the huge growth in human population and the link with carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas. But what we can do does not have to be very major. If we do not work in a space that allows us to positively contribute that much, we can just do a few things. For example, number one, do a baseline, what we call baseline accounting of one's own action. Basically, looking at what is the small things that we do that we can actually change. You don't have to change everything at one go. For example, maybe when we have takeaways, we bring our own boxes of food, or we can have what we call meat-free Mondays. Meat-free Mondays, for example, also, or
Yeah.
we can bring our own cutleries. These are small things that we can do, and I think that we should do things. For the first step, we should do things which we are comfortable about first, and by transiting that way, I think eventually we'll do more and more sustainable stuff and changing our lifestyle, and you realize that a lot of these lifestyle changes can actually have cost savings as well. Um, that's another episode, but yeah, so that's what we can do on that end. I think also in the point about companies I raised earlier, we may be in different jobs. I mean, not all companies have a sustainability role. Not all companies may say that they care about sustainability. But regardless of what functions we are in, I firmly believe that we can actually do our part. We can actually look at our job scope and see how can it be more sustainable. What can we do? Let's say even from a communications angle, how can we communicate in a more clear way that actually portrays certain sustainability elements in it as well? So my view is that every job can and should be a green job. So that is a view that I always have, and I think that that is a view that you all can consider too as well. And I mean, if anyone wants to contact me for further clarifications, I'm always available on LinkedIn and my own website as well, and happy to chat as well. Yeah.
Fantastic. And I'll put your LinkedIn and your personal website, which is really nice, by the way. I'll put those in the show notes. So if anybody does want to contact you, they can get those links from the show notes page of the podcast. So, thank you for those call to actions. I like the kind of those, that self appraisal and small actions matter. So I appreciate that idea, and certainly being as a communicator most of my professional career, I appreciate your kind of business perspective that businesses need to continue to improve and clarify their communications and be more transparent and help tell that story in a more transparent way that citizens can understand. So I appreciate both your call to actions to individuals as well as to corporations. I guess we're at the part of the program where I ask people about their hopes for the future. So, when talking about these sustainability topics, they're sometimes hard, and there's some really challenging, times ahead of us with regards to a warming climate. So hope is this idea that there's a vision for a better future, and that we have some ability to take steps towards that better future. So I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and just kind of give me your first answer. It's kind of a rapid fire thing, because I want to know what makes you hopeful. So the first question is, what's your vision for a better future? And it can be for you personally or professionally, or for the world. What's your vision for a better future?
I think my vision for the better future is whereby business incentives and drivers are actually aligned with sustainability, whereby there is a clear intersection between both of them and that both can go hand in hand.
Now, second question is why. Help us understand why that's your vision for a better future.
I think after all, my opinion is that capital is a huge driver of growth, and if you do not get businesses on board, then there's no way anything is going to progress forward. And businesses have a lot of capital, so we just need to get their buy-in. And how do you get their buy-in? Is through individual actions, and as I shared earlier about governmental regulations as well. Yeah.
Fantastic. So the last question is, imagine a future where what you hope to be is reality. We're now living in the future where businesses are aligned with sustainable goals and making profits. And um, how does that make you feel now that we're living in that vision?
I think it's just alive. I think I get to be in a place where I truly belong, and that everything is aligned with me. I mean, that being said, I'm not idealistic in the sense that I believe that there will still be conflict and disagreements. But I think that's where further things can be more fine-tuned, and therefore there can be more progress done. But that is a huge step forward, really, and I'm looking forward to that day.
Nice. Well, Lewis, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to that future day too, where businesses are more aligned. And yeah, conflicts are always going to be there, but I agree with your hope and for a better future that if we get there together, we can also face conflicts with more compassion and not necessarily see us as at odds all the time. So I appreciate your vision for the future, and I'm going to do my little piece to help you get there and help us get there. So thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your expertise, and very appreciated. And I've learned a lot today, and I'm sure the audience has as well. So with that, I wish you well, Lewis, and I will stay in touch and follow your career as it goes, and look forward to your first Muay Thai fight coming up, hopefully.
Yes. Thank you so much, Stephen, for having me here.
All right. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
That brings us to the end of another enlightening episode of Stories Sustain Us. I want to extend my gratitude to Lewis Chan for sharing his incredible journey and wealth of expertise in the field of sustainable finance. His insights on the importance of tracking and measuring impact to drive improvement, and his emphasis on balance in ESG reporting and the triple bottom line are invaluable. And I wish Lewis all the best with his Arctic Glide startup. The innovative technology this air conditioner uses highlights Lewis's commitment to practical solutions that benefit both the environment and the economy. Lewis's vision for a future where business incentives and sustainability are aligned is truly inspiring. It's a vision of progress and balance, one that we can all strive towards. I also found his tips to be practical takeaways for all of us to consider when combating greenwashing and finding truly sustainable companies to support with our wallets and investments. Like I really enjoyed this conversation with Lewis, particularly around some of the talk and discussion about what's happening here in the United States with regards to ESG metrics as compared to Southeast Asia and Australia, where Lewis does most of his work. It's really disappointing to me. It's not necessarily surprising, but really disappointing to me nevertheless that over the last couple of years, there's been such a powerful political backlash against ESG reporting, these types of sustainability or environmental, social governance type reporting. You know, some states have even gone so far as to ban this type of reporting in their state legislatures, and it's sadly not surprising to me, but also very dangerous and disappointing nevertheless. You know, there's a number of individuals and businesses, leaders and investors who've made a considerable amount of money over the last few decades that our economic systems have been really focused on this shareholder first type of system. And those folks don't like change. They don't want change, right? The system's working well for them. It's benefiting them and their pocketbooks immensely. And it's those business interests that often have a significant hand in helping elected officials get into office. So it's not surprising then that those elected officials also have a strong dislike for ESG reporting. You know, they're supported by the same companies that don't like ESG reporting. Shocker. So one of the arguments that is often made by those who are against ESG reporting is that it is puts at risk shareholder profits. I mean, they're just making it clear. Look, they want to continue with shareholder first economies, which is why they don't want to look at the environmental, social, or governance issues in a regulatory fashion because it might harm shareholder profits. That's an old way of thinking. It's an outdated way of thinking. It's certainly not visionary. It's not looking forward. It's not looking to see how we can become more sustainable as a society, as a world. And that's troubling to me. I deeply believe that all of our need to move towards a sustainable world hinges largely on this economic piece. If we can't move away from a shareholder first perspective towards and into a more balanced triple bottom line approach of people, planet, and profit, right? It's great to make money, but if you're making money at the cost of everything else, harming people, harming the planet, then that's not sustainable. So those who are fighting these ESG metrics because they want to maintain the status quo of shareholder first, it's disappointing. And I hope those who vote pay attention to what those elected officials are doing and saying in these areas of sustainability. Might not be top of mind this particular election cycle, but it is certainly important nevertheless that you learn where those who want your vote stand on these important issues of environmental sustainability. And ESG reporting and metrics are part of that. They're not perfect, but they are moving us towards a more balanced approach to economics that I think is incredibly important if we're going to live in a sustainable world. And they also help in the realm of greenwashing. I mean, that's a real thing these days. It's hard for a consumer to know when a business tells us on their packaging or in their advertising that they're green, that they're environmental, that they're sustainable, that they're doing the right thing. Advertising is not always telling us what's actually happening with these products. And it's interesting, right? We live in this world where macroeconomic theory talks about the free flowing of information between the producer and the consumer so that we can have these markets that function properly. It's as a consumer, it's darn near impossible to find out the truth of what's actually going on. The producer is always going to have more information about their product than the consumer. So without a reliable and accurate sense of environmental and social reporting and governance reporting, this ESG type of reporting, without that regulatorily mandated and in place, the consumers are going to have a heck of a hard time ever knowing if a company is telling the truth about its footprint with regards to sustainability and environmental protections that are in place. We're not going to know about the externalities that the company is aware of, but they're passing on to us, the consumer, to deal with. So there are regulations in place that can protect the financial systems, that protect the shareholder first value. So regulations aren't necessarily bad. They are already in place to make sure shareholders are protected financially. I'm just simply suggesting that now is the time that we also implement regulations that look to protect us from the environmental perspective of businesses and their social impact of businesses as well. And yes, those might impact the shareholder first perspective, but that's the point. We're trying to have more balance, not do away with profits, but make sure that the system itself is more balanced so that people, planet, and profit is all getting looked at within our economic system. So it's a lot to look at, and I'm sure I'll have more guests on in the future to talk about these types of issues. But for now, I just thank Louis for the work that he's doing in Southeast Asia, being on the front lines, and particularly in the industry of mining. We need mines, clearly, but helping them become more sustainable and more environmentally balanced is such a crucial thing. And kudos to Louis for taking on that work. So please join me in thanking Louis Chan once again for his time and his insights. And I want to thank you, audience, for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to share it with others. Subscribe to the show's channels, please. Rate the show and leave a review. If you leave a comment, I'm going to respond. So, please get in touch. Let me know what you think of the show. Let me know if you have any guest ideas or somebody that you'd like me to interview. I'd appreciate that feedback as well. Just as I appreciate all your support for this show. So thank you. Next week on Stories Sustain Us, I have a really fun conversation with a former work colleague. This is an old friend who I worked with over 20 years ago. My guest emphasizes the importance of storytelling and finding common ground in bipartisan work as she reflects on the challenges and successes of her advocacy efforts. Her successful career in Texas and now in Colorado includes legislative wins promoting dark skies and scenic byways, as well as advancing economic development and workforce housing. So join me on August 13th for an engaging conversation about the importance of balancing sustainability and economic profitability and the need for a more representative and collaborative political system. The episode will be available wherever you listen to podcasts and at storiessustainus.com. So until next time, I'm Stephen Schauer. Please take care of yourself and take care of each other. Take care.